Hey everyone, welcome to the Explainer. So, get this, just 40 days after dropping 4.7, Anthropic has already rolled out Claude Opus 4.8. And honestly, looking at this strictly from a software engineering perspective, it becomes super clear right away that this is not just some minor patch. This update is laser-focused on long-running agentic developer tasks. Seriously, if you have been sitting around waiting for an AI model that can actually act like a reliable, autonomous junior engineer, this is absolutely an update we need to dig into.
Okay, let's dive into this and look at our roadmap. We are going to unpack the new developer toolkit. Then we'll explore how the model orchestrates dynamic workflows. After that, we'll look at how we are finally reclaiming our thinking budget control, and we'll wrap the whole thing up with API caching and cost optimizations. Starting right off with Section 1, the new developer toolkit and the raw chops required for agentic coding. Look, before we can even think about trusting an AI with massive tasks across an entire codebase, we really have to verify its raw capabilities. The overarching thesis of Opus 4.8 is that it's purposefully built from the ground up for long-running agentic coding tasks. We've all been there, right? You watch a model confidently double down on a terrible piece of code, the classic stubborn hallucination, but the data suggests 4.8 is substantially better at simply accepting when it's wrong or admitting when it's not confident. And let's be real. That exact humility is absolutely required if you want an automated coding agent running loose in your repos. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive leap we're talking about. On the agentic coding sweep bench verified, Opus 4.8 actually holds an almost 10-point lead over GPT 5.5. Think about that. Finding issues, deeply understanding context, and writing a patch that actually works. Having a near 10-point lead at the frontier model level proves this thing really has the underlying engine needed for serious, heavy-duty engineering workloads. But hey, as engineers, we know the devil is always in the details. When you look at the Agentic Terminal Coding Bench, 2.1 Opus 4.8 scores 74%, while GPT 5.5 is reported slightly higher at 78%. But there is a really crucial nuance here regarding how these models are actually tested. Anthropic reported their scores using the standard Terminus 2 public harness, the one that literally comes with the benchmark. GPT 5.5, on the other hand, used the highly optimized Codex CLI harness, which actually scored a whopping 84.4% in their tests. So the big takeaway for those of us actually building on top of these models, the harness you use is literally just as important as the model itself. If you optimize your harness, your results are going to jump significantly. Moving right along to Section 2. Orchestrating dynamic workflows and scaling up to massive migrations. This brings us to what I think is a massively impactful capability for literally anyone managing a large-scale codebase: dynamic workflows. This feature basically allows Claude to act as a lead engineer. You assign it a giant task, and it dynamically writes its own orchestration scripts to spin up tens or even hundreds of parallel subagents in a single session. And it actually checks its own work before returning a result. We are talking about setting Claude loose to run for hours, maybe even days, on massive bug hunts or sweeping structural updates. Let's walk through how this architecture actually plays out in a real-world scenario. Step 1. You assign a verifiable task. Say, migrate every internal fetch call in our codebase over to the new HTTPS client wrapper. Step 2. Claude analyzes that scope and spawns its own orchestration scripts. Step 3. It fires up hundreds of parallel subagents to tackle all those different modules simultaneously. And Step 4. It verifies all those changes against your test suite before it ever presents the final pull request to you. To see this actually working in the wild, we can look at an incredible case study. Anthropic recently acquired a company called Bun, and they use these dynamic workflows to execute a massive codebase migration. They literally rewrote the Bun package from Zig to Rust. And the result? They got 99.8% of the existing test suite passing. That is a highly complex production-level language migration handled entirely autonomously by the model just orchestrating its own workflows. Absolutely wild. Now hold your horses for a second, because there is a massive but here for anyone rushing off to try this. There is a very strict prerequisite. As the source material explicitly points out, you want to make sure that your code is verifiable. There are unit tests that run for everything, because that is the way that the model can check whether the implementation is actually correct. You have to remember, dynamic workflows consume a massive amount of tokens because they carry their own orchestration overhead. If you do not have a highly verifiable code base with strict, comprehensive unit tests, you are just going to burn through your entire compute budget with nothing to show for it. The model absolutely needs those tests so it can grade its own homework. All right, jumping into Section 3, reclaiming thinking budget control. Manual control is finally back.
Now, what's really interesting about this operational shift is that it shows Anthropic has clearly been listening to the community. Back in Opus 4.7, they introduced adaptive thinking, which basically let the model adaptively decide how much budget to allocate to a task. And honestly, developers kind of hated it. It led to totally unpredictable token usage and a complete lack of control. Well, with Opus 4.8, manual control is back on the menu. We now have strict token budgets, highly predictable costs, and the absolute freedom to tell the model exactly how hard we want it to think. So here are the new manual thinking budget tiers you can actually set. Low, medium, high, which by the way is the recommended default setting, extra high, and max. You finally get to dictate the compute. Now, just as a quick side note, the UI in Claude.ai doesn't visually summarize the thinking tokens anymore like it used to. It's a bit of an interesting design choice, but on an API and functional level, getting granular control of our token budgets back is a huge win for predictability.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 4, API caching and optimization. Let's talk speed, cost, and efficiency.
Looking under the hood at these API level optimizations, the Messages API has received a really critical update. It now accepts system entries directly inside the message array. Why is this such a game changer? Well, previously, if you altered your instructions mid-task, it would totally break your prompt cache. And as developers, we all know the absolute pain of suddenly paying full price for thousands of uncached tokens just because you tweaked an instruction. Now, you can update those instructions mid-task with zero prompt cache breaks and without routing through a standard user turn. For multi-step agentic loops, this is just massive.
So the crucial point here when it comes to cost efficiency is the number 3. Fast mode for Opus 4.8 is now 3 times cheaper than it was for previous models. Fast mode already delivers 2.5 times the speed, which makes it incredibly viable for quick, routine implementations where you just want rapid-fire code generation and don't want to wait around for those heavy max-tier thinking wait times. Sloshing the cost by a factor of 3 completely changes the ROI on using fast mode for your daily developer tasks.
And while we're talking about costs, let's take a second to appreciate Opus 4.8's pricing stability. While competitors out there like Google are facing some serious backlash for raising prices on models like Flash 3.5, Anthropic has completely held the line. You are still paying $5 per million input tokens and $25 per million output tokens. They set realistic expectations right out of the gate, maintained healthy margins, and entirely avoided the need for price hikes. On top of that, there are some very strong hints that these Opus-level capabilities might be expanding to the general public pretty soon, likely fueled by Anthropic's colossal compute deal with xAI or SpaceX. They finally have the serious hardware backing to scale this whole thing up. At the end of the day, this release isn't just about faster text generation. It is about providing the actual engineering scaffolding to automate those boring, repetitive, and massive coding bottlenecks that constantly slow our teams down. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Knowing that you can now spin up hundreds of parallel subagents to independently hunt down bugs and migrate code, assuming your test suite is rock solid, of course, how will dynamic workflows change the way you plan your next major refactor? Think about it. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.